What I think is happening is I think there are fake people on the payroll. I think that paychecks are getting sent to people who do not really exist.
All right, you guys. So a week before Charlie lost his life, he expressed some concerns about the finances at Turning Point USA.
The moment those whispers started sliding into donor inboxes, the entire Turning Point USA machine felt like it hit black ice. Because the new chatter isn't coming from random trolls anymore. It's coming from people who write the checks, big ones, the kind that don't just clap at events, they keep the lights on. And now, according to a wave of fresh reports and insider claims making the rounds online, those donors aren't smiling. They're asking one question on repeat. And it's the kind of question that makes everyone in power suddenly busy and hard to reach. Where did the money go? And here's where it gets messy, because the headlines aren't just hinting at sloppy bookkeeping, they're hinting at something darker. People are alleging missing millions, ghost payroll, and a whole web of vague expenses that nobody can explain without sounding like they're reading from a prepared statement. And right in the center of it all, the name being dragged into every thread, every live stream, every comment section like it's a magnet for chaos, is Erika Kirk. Now, let's be clear, we're talking commentary here. We're not saying any of this is proven. We're saying the reports are piling up, the rumors are spreading, and the public is reacting like it's front row seats to the wildest reality show twist of the year. Because when supporters start demanding receipts, the vibe flips fast. Fans are shocked, emotions ran high, and suddenly the story isn't just about a movement anymore. It's about control, image, and who gets to write the narrative when the spotlight gets hot. And if you think this is just online noise, listen to how the tone has changed. The same crowd that used to defend everything now sounds uneasy, like they're trying to convince themselves. One minute it's, she's grieving. The next it's, why is everything a brand? One minute it's, respect the family. The next it's, show us the numbers. And if the reports are even half as dramatic as they sound, then the pressure on Erika isn't just public, it's personal. Because once donors start talking refunds, that's not just criticism, that's a vote of no confidence. So buckle up, because if these claims keep spreading, this won't be a small scandal. It'll be the kind of storm that leaves the whole inner circle divided, and everybody watching, waiting for the first real crack to show. The tension did not explode all at once. It crept in quietly, the kind of slow pressure that builds behind closed doors before anyone realizes the walls are starting to bend. According to reports circulating online, the first signs showed up in private conversations between longtime supporters. Messages that once focused on upcoming events and shared victories slowly shifted into cautious questions. People began asking each other if they had heard the same rumors, whether anyone had seen clear numbers, whether anyone actually knew what was happening behind the scenes anymore. And while none of it came with official confirmation, the sheer volume of similar stories gave the whispers weight. Those reports suggest that several donors who had supported the organization for years felt blindsided. They believed they were contributing to a mission they understood, one that had always emphasized transparency and purpose. But suddenly, they were reading claims about unexplained expenses, broad financial categories, and money moving in ways that felt distant and impersonal. Some insiders alleged that when donors asked for clarification, the answers felt rehearsed, almost too polished, like every response had been approved by a team before it ever left the room. Fans are shocked by how quickly trust appeared to shift into suspicion. Inside the organization, according to commentary shared by former staff and anonymous sources, the atmosphere allegedly changed as well. What had once been described as energetic and mission-driven began to feel tense and carefully managed. Meetings reportedly became shorter, conversations more guarded. People were said to be choosing their words carefully, aware that anything they said could be repeated or misinterpreted. Emotions ran high, not because of open conflict, but because of what was not being said. Uncertainty has a way of draining confidence, and that uncertainty seemed to hang in the air. In the middle of all this stands Erika Kirk, the face most often mentioned in these reports. Some narratives paint her as overwhelmed, others as calculated.
Erika Kirk's ex is now the speaker for Turning Point, Cabot Phillips, the editor of the Daily Wire, the outlet that actively had beef with Charlie. The same Daily Wire that went and took over the Charlie Kirk show for a cameo 6 days after he was assassinated. Not only is this guy Erika's ex, but while Erika was dating Cabot, Cabot already knew.
But nearly all of them agree on one thing. She is now at the center of the story whether she wants to be or not. Commentators claim that her public presence increased dramatically as questions about finances grew louder.
More interviews, more appearances, more emotional moments shared with audiences. To some viewers, it looked like strength. To others, it looked like deflection. The same clip could be interpreted in completely different ways depending on
who was watching. What makes the situation even more dramatic is the timing. These reports surfaced during a period when emotions were already raw. Supporters were still processing loss, still trying to adjust to a new reality, and that vulnerability may have amplified every rumor. Some fans argued that questioning leadership during such a sensitive time was unfair. Others felt that this was exactly when transparency mattered most. The community felt split, not by ideology, but by trust. The family was left divided in a way that did not show up on stage, but was impossible to miss online. According to multiple commentaries, donor frustration did not remain private for long. Screenshots of emails and alleged conversations began circulating, each one fueling the next wave of speculation. Some donors were said to be quietly pulling back support, choosing not to renew commitments until they felt reassured. Others allegedly went further, asking whether refunds were even possible. That idea alone sent shockwaves through fan communities because it suggested a level of dissatisfaction rarely seen before. Even those who dismissed the rumors admitted that something felt different this time. Behind the scenes, reports describe a growing sense of isolation around Erika. Her circle, according to observers, appeared to tighten. Fewer people spoke on her behalf. More communication flowed through intermediaries. While this could be interpreted as a normal response to public pressure, critics framed it as control. Every move, every appearance, every statement was scrutinized. Nothing existed in a neutral space anymore. Even silence became.
I believe that we all have angels in our lives, and these are my little angels from Antonio Placement Center in Constanța, Romania.
Listen.
Our goal with the Romanian Angels Project was to show these children the true American heart during the holiday season. And what better way to do that than having our United States military personally deliver
a statement. And as the noise grew louder, the pressure reportedly followed her everywhere, from private meetings to public stages. Commentators also highlighted how quickly perception can turn into narrative. Once the phrase "missing millions" entered public conversation, it became nearly impossible to contain. Even when people acknowledged there was no proof, the idea itself lingered. It showed up in comment sections, live stream chats, and reaction videos. Some fans defended Erika passionately, accusing critics of exploiting grief for clicks. Others argued that asking questions was not betrayal, but responsibility. The clash between those viewpoints created a constant undercurrent of conflict that refused to settle. As this first wave of reports continued to spread, the story stopped being just about finances. It became about power, influence, and who truly controls the legacy moving forward. Supporters began debating whether leadership should evolve or remain untouched. Critics questioned whether branding had replaced authenticity. Every argument fed the next, creating a loop of outrage and defense that played out in real time. And through it all, Erika remained visible, emotional, and silent on the specifics, a combination that only intensified curiosity. What stands out most in these accounts is not any single allegation, but the collective mood they describe, a movement once defined by confidence, now grappling with doubt. Supporters who once spoke in unison, now questioning in fragments. None of this confirms wrongdoing, but it paints a picture of a community in transition, struggling to reconcile loyalty with unanswered questions. And as the reports continue to circulate, one thing becomes clear. This is no longer a quiet internal matter. It is a public drama unfolding piece by piece, with every new claim adding another layer to a story that refuses to slow down. The tension did not explode in a single moment. It crept in quietly, the kind of pressure that builds when too many unanswered questions start stacking on top of each other. According to reports circulating online, the earliest signs showed up in private donor conversations that were never meant to leave inboxes or group chats. People who had supported the organization for years began allegedly asking the same careful questions, almost apologetically at first. They wanted clarity, they wanted reassurance. They wanted to know whether the numbers they were seeing made sense. None of them were accusing anyone outright, but the tone had shifted from confidence to concern. Those reports claim that some donors felt blindsided by how suddenly everything seemed to change. They remembered a time when financial updates were frequent, when the mission felt personal and direct. Now, according to commentary from insiders, the explanation sounded distant and overly polished. Expenses were grouped into broad categories that felt impossible to challenge without sounding suspicious yourself. Outreach, operations, brand expansion, words that sounded professional but revealed very little. Fans are shocked by how quickly those familiar terms became a source of discomfort instead of reassurance.
Inside the organization, the atmosphere was described by anonymous voices as noticeably different. Where conversations once flowed freely, people
allegedly became guarded. Meetings felt shorter, more controlled, with fewer open discussions and more prepared talking points. Emotions ran high, not because of shouting or visible conflict, but because of the silence between sentences. Staff members were said to be watching each other closely, unsure who still felt safe to speak and who preferred to stay quiet. Uncertainty has a way of draining energy, and according to reports, that uncertainty was everywhere. Erika Kirk, according to the same wave of online commentary, found herself at the center of a storm she may not have anticipated. Her name appeared in nearly every discussion, every theory, every reaction video. Some narratives painted her as overwhelmed by pressure, struggling to balance grief, leadership, and public expectation. Others suggested she appeared unusually composed, almost strategic, as if every appearance had been carefully planned. The divide in perception became part of the drama itself. The same interview that inspired sympathy in one viewer sparked suspicion in another. What intensified everything was timing. These reports did not surface during a calm period. They emerged while emotions were already raw, when supporters were still processing loss and change. That vulnerability made every rumor feel heavier, every claim more personal. Some fans argued that questioning leadership during such a sensitive moment was unfair, even cruel. Others insisted that moments of transition were exactly when transparency mattered most. The community began to fracture, not loudly, but noticeably. The family was left divided in a way that did not require public arguments to be obvious. As more commentary spread, alleged donor frustration no longer stayed private. Screenshots of emails, messages, and partial conversations began circulating online, stripped of context but heavy with implication. Each image fueled the next wave of speculation. Some donors were said to be quietly stepping back, choosing not to renew commitments until they felt confident again. Others allegedly asked whether refunds were even an option. That idea alone sent shockwaves through fan communities because it suggested a level of distrust rarely seen before. Even supporters who dismissed the rumors admitted something felt off, not because there was proof of wrongdoing, but because the energy had changed. The conversations were no longer about growth or impact. They were about explanations and optics. Critics pointed out that once a narrative about missing millions enters public conversation, it becomes almost impossible to contain. Even when everyone agrees it remains unproven. The phrase itself lingers, repeating in comment sections, live streams, and reaction videos, growing louder with each retelling. Reports also describe Erika's public presence increasing during this period. More interviews, more appearances, more emotional moments shared with audiences. To some viewers, it looked like resilience and determination. To others, it looked like deflection, as if visibility could replace clarity. Every tear, every pause, every carefully chosen word was analyzed. Nothing existed in a neutral space anymore. Even silence became a statement, interpreted differently depending on who was watching. Behind the scenes, commentators claim Erika's inner circle appeared to tighten. Fewer people spoke directly on her behalf. Communication allegedly flowed through publicists and intermediaries instead of familiar voices. Supporters argue this was a natural response to pressure and harassment. Critics framed it as control. The truth may sit somewhere in between, but perception often matters more than intention, and perception, according to these reports, was shifting fast. The story also began to expand beyond finances. It became about power and legacy. Supporters debated who should guide the future and how closely it should resemble the past. Critics questioned whether branding had begun to overshadow authenticity. Every argument fed the next, creating a loop of defense and doubt that played out daily across social platforms. Emotions ran high not because anyone had definitive answers, but because everyone felt invested in the outcome. What stands out most in these accounts is not a single allegation, but the collective mood they describe. A movement once defined by certainty, now grappling with questions it was not prepared to answer publicly. Supporters who once spoke in unison, now speaking in fragments, choosing sides without always realizing it. None of this confirms wrongdoing. It confirms tension. And as the reports continue to circulate, that tension refuses to settle,
hanging over every appearance and every statement like a question that no one has fully addressed yet. As the conversation grew louder online, the pressure reportedly began to seep into private spaces as well. According to commentary from people claiming knowledge of internal dynamics, donor calls started carrying a
different tone. These were no longer casual check-ins or words of encouragement. They were pointed, careful, and sometimes tense. Donors allegedly wanted timelines, numbers, and explanations that went beyond general statements. When answers did not come quickly or clearly, frustration began to replace patience. Fans are shocked by how fast admiration turned into anxiety. Some reports describe donors comparing notes with each other, trying to piece together a bigger picture from fragments of information. One person would mention a delayed response. Another would reference a vague explanation. Slowly, a pattern seemed to form, at least in the eyes of those watching closely. Even without proof, repetition gave the impression of consistency, and consistency made the rumors feel heavier. Emotions ran high as supporters struggled with a growing sense of unease, unsure whether they were overreacting or finally seeing something they had missed before. Inside the organization, according to anonymous voices, tension allegedly became harder to hide. People described walking into meetings where the energy felt tight, almost brittle. Conversations stayed surface level, jokes disappeared. Staff members were said to avoid sensitive topics altogether, not because they did not care, but because they didn't want to be the one who asked the wrong question. Silence can feel safer than curiosity in moments like this, and that silence reportedly spread quickly. Commentators began to focus more intensely on Erika's role during this period. Her appearances, her words, even her body language were analyzed frame by frame. Some viewers felt she looked exhausted, carrying the weight of expectations from every direction. Others argued she appeared confident, even commanding, as if fully aware of her position. The split in perception became part of the spectacle. Supporters defended her fiercely, saying grief affects everyone differently. Critics claimed that grief and leadership were being blurred in ways that felt uncomfortable. The story took another dramatic turn when alleged insider claims suggested disagreements within the inner circle itself. While none of this has been confirmed, reports hinted at behind-the-scenes friction. Some individuals were said to favor a quieter approach, stepping back until the noise faded. Others allegedly pushed for visibility, believing that controlling the narrative required staying in the spotlight. Those competing strategies reportedly caused tension, with no clear consensus on which path would rebuild trust faster. Online, the reaction grew more emotional by the day. Comment sections became battlegrounds. One side accused critics of exploiting tragedy for attention. The other accused defenders of ignoring red flags. The family was left divided in the court of public opinion, even if no one said it out loud. Longtime supporters found themselves arguing with people they once agreed with, not over values, but over trust. That shift alone made the situation feel more serious than a typical controversy. Reports also began circulating about changes in how events were organized and presented. Observers claimed that gatherings felt more polished, more controlled, less spontaneous than before. Branding appeared stronger, visuals more refined, messaging more consistent. To some, this looked like professionalism. To others, it looked like distance. The question hanging over everything was whether this evolution was natural growth or a response to scrutiny. Once that question entered the conversation, it refused to leave. Another layer of drama emerged as commentators speculated about finances beyond donations. Discussions turned towards salaries, consulting arrangements, and partnerships, all framed carefully as questions rather than accusations. People asked how leadership compensation was determined and whether it had changed recently. Others wondered how much money flowed through associated projects and appearances. Again, no proof was offered, but the sheer volume of questions created a sense of momentum that felt impossible to stop. Erika's emotional interviews became a focal point during this phase. Clips of her speaking through tears circulated widely. Some viewers found them raw and convincing, saying they reflected genuine pain. Others felt uneasy, suggesting the moment seemed rehearsed or repeated too often. Emotions ran high on both sides, because emotion itself had become part of the narrative. Whether intentional or not, feeling was now inseparable from perception, and perception was shaping belief. According to commentary, the pressure reportedly began to affect morale. People who once felt proud to be associated with the organization allegedly started keeping their distance publicly. Social media bios changed, posts became less frequent, silence replaced enthusiasm. None of this proves anything, but patterns like these tend to feel speculation rather than comment. Every absence was interpreted as a statement, even if it was not meant to be one. At the same time, defenders doubled down. They reminded everyone that rumors are not facts, and that grief can distort both behavior and judgment. They argued that transitions are messy, and that outsiders rarely see the full picture. These voices added balance, but they also highlighted how polarized the conversation had become. There was no longer a shared understanding of reality, only competing narratives fighting for dominance. As days turned into weeks, the sense of waiting grew heavier. Supporters waited for clarity, critics waited for confirmation. Everyone waited for something definitive that never quite arrived. The absence of clear answers did not quiet the story, it amplified it. Uncertainty became the fuel that kept the drama alive, pushing people to fill gaps with theories, emotions, and assumptions. By the end of this phase, the story had evolved far beyond its starting point. What began as questions about money had transformed into a broader debate about leadership, trust, and authenticity. Erika remained at the center, not because of proven actions, but because of perception. And in the world of public opinion, perception often moves faster than facts. The tension described in these reports did not resolve itself. It simply settled deeper, setting the stage for even more intense reactions as the spotlight refused to move on. As the speculation continued to spread, the focus reportedly shifted from donors to what some commentators described as quiet movement behind the curtain. Voices online began claiming that internal structures were changing in subtle but meaningful ways. Longtime figures who once felt central to the organization were said to be appearing less often, while new faces seemed to emerge almost overnight. None of this was announced publicly, yet viewers swore they could feel the shift. Fans are shocked by how quickly familiarity gave way to uncertainty. According to these reports, some former insiders hinted that decision-making no longer felt collaborative. Where discussions once involved multiple perspectives, authority now appeared more centralized. This perception fueled a new wave of commentary, suggesting that leadership was tightening control rather than opening dialogue. Supporters defended this as necessary during a crisis, arguing that too many voices could create chaos. Critics countered that concentration of power without transparency only deepened mistrust. Emotions ran high as both sides accused the other of missing the bigger picture. The narrative became even more dramatic when personal relationships were dragged into the conversation. Commentators speculated about who had influence, who had access, and who might benefit from the new structure. Every appearance together, every shared stage, every photograph became evidence in the court of public opinion. None of it proved anything, but it created a story people could follow, and stories have a way of shaping belief even in the absence of facts. The family was left divided once again, this time over loyalty versus accountability. Online discussions began framing the situation as a complete transformation rather than a temporary storm. People argued that the organization no longer felt like a movement, but like a brand. Merchandise, polished events, curated messaging. Some praised the professionalism, saying growth was inevitable. Others felt alienated, claiming the raw energy they once admired had been replaced by image management. The debate spilled across platforms, with reaction videos dissecting everything from lighting choices to word selection during speeches. Erika's role in this transformation remained the most polarizing topic. Some viewers believed she was simply adapting to survive intense scrutiny, doing what any leader under pressure would do. Others suggested she was actively reshaping the narrative to center herself as both symbol and authority. Every time she spoke about legacy, critics asked whether it was preservation or reinvention. Every time she mentioned faith or resilience, supporters applauded, while skeptics rolled their eyes. The same moment sparked completely opposite reactions, depending on who was watching. Reports also suggested that financial questions were becoming more complex rather than clearer. Discussions expanded beyond donations into how money circulates through events, partnerships, and services. Commentators spoke about how easily expenses can be categorized in ways that sound legitimate but reveal little. Operations, consulting, outreach. These words echoed through conversations like placeholders for answers that never arrived. Again, no proof was offered, but the mechanics themselves became part of the suspicion. What intensified the drama was the idea that everything described could technically be legal while still feeling wrong to supporters. That distinction mattered. People were not necessarily accusing
anyone of crimes. They were questioning intent, priorities, and transparency. That gray area made the story harder to dismiss. It was not about a single shocking revelation. It was about accumulation. Small changes, repeated explanations, and growing distance, all adding up to something that felt unsettling. Emotionally, the toll described by commentators was evident. Supporters expressed exhaustion from constantly defending or questioning something they once trusted without hesitation. Critics admitted feeling conflicted, torn between respect for loss and frustration over unanswered questions. This emotional tug-of-war kept people engaged, even when they wanted to step back. The story had become personal, not because of facts, but because of feelings tied to belief and identity. Some voices online claimed that even within leadership circles, nerves were fraying. Alleged disagreements over strategy, messaging, and response to criticism were hinted at, though never confirmed. The idea that unity might be cracking added another layer of intrigue. People began speculating about internal reviews, quiet audits, or behind-the-scenes evaluations.
Whether true or not, the possibility alone kept the conversation alive and moving. Public appearances during this period took on a different tone. Audiences watched closely, searching for signs of stress or confidence. Applause felt more cautious, reactions more measured. Every speech seemed to carry an undercurrent of evaluation rather than admiration. Fans are shocked by how quickly support transformed into scrutiny. The spotlight no longer felt celebratory, it felt investigative. At the same time, Erika continued to project composure. She spoke about strength, faith, and perseverance, themes that resonated with many. But for others, those words rang hollow without concrete answers. The contrast between emotional messaging and practical questions became a central tension. Critics argued that inspiration could not replace information. Supporters insisted that leadership was about vision, not spreadsheets. The gap between those views widened daily. As this phase of the story unfolded, the narrative stopped being driven by any single claim. It was driven by atmosphere, a sense that something fundamental had shifted, and that no one could quite explain it clearly. The lack of resolution became its own storyline. People tuned in not for answers, but for signs, a change in tone, a different approach, a moment that might break the stalemate. Instead, what they saw was continuation, continued appearances, continued speculation, continued division. The reports described a movement suspended between past and future, unsure how to reconcile loyalty with doubt. Erika remained central to that tension, embodying both continuity and change. And as long as perception outweighed clarity, the drama showed no signs of fading. It simply evolved, growing heavier with each unanswered question, and each new interpretation layered onto a story that refused to settle into anything simple or certain. By the time the narrative reached this stage, the pressure described in ongoing reports had reportedly reached a boiling point. What once felt like scattered rumors now felt to many observers like a sustained atmosphere of tension that refused to lift. Supporters who had tried to stay neutral found it harder to do so. Every new appearance, every post, every silence seemed to demand interpretation. Fans are shocked by how consuming the story became, pulling in even those who wanted nothing more than clarity and calm. Commentary during this phase suggested that donor behavior may have started shifting in visible ways. People online pointed out changes in fundraising energy, claiming the enthusiasm that once felt effortless now appeared forced. Whether those impressions were accurate or not, they mattered, because perception was driving conversation. Some donors were said to be hesitating, watching carefully before committing further support. Others allegedly redirected their attention elsewhere, not as an act of protest, but as a way to avoid uncertainty. That quiet withdrawal spoke louder than any public statement. Inside the organization, according to speculative accounts, morale was reportedly uneven. Some individuals remained deeply loyal, convinced the storm would pass. Others allegedly felt uneasy, unsure how to reconcile their belief in the mission with the growing questions surrounding it. Emotions ran high in subtle ways. Tension showed up not in arguments, but in distance. People stopped volunteering opinions. Conversations became transactional rather than passionate. That shift alone fueled outside speculation that something fundamental had changed. Erika's leadership style during this period became a focal point for analysis. Supporters described her as resilient, standing firm under intense pressure. Critics described her as guarded, even defensive. The same behavior inspired opposite. Conclusions. When she spoke confidently, some saw strength, others saw control. When she showed emotion, some saw authenticity, others saw performance. The inability to agree on her intent became part of the larger drama, reinforcing the idea that truth was secondary to interpretation. Online voices also began framing the situation as a cautionary tale rather than a single controversy. Discussions turned philosophical, questioning what happens when movements grow too fast, when grief intersects with power, and when loyalty collides with accountability. These broader themes kept the story alive even as specific allegations remained unproven. People were no longer just reacting to claims, they were projecting fears and experiences onto the narrative, making it resonate far beyond its original scope. Reports suggested that the constant scrutiny began taking a personal toll. Observers claimed Erika appeared more guarded in public, her circle tighter, her schedule carefully managed. Supporters argued this was necessary self-protection. Critics saw it as further distance from the base. The family was left divided again, not by facts, but by how those facts were interpreted or withheld. Every decision seemed to reinforce existing beliefs rather than change minds. The idea of transparency became the most repeated demand in these discussions. People were not necessarily asking for scandal, they were asking for reassurance, for something concrete to anchor trust again. Yet, according to commentary, clear explanations remained elusive. Broad statements replaced specifics. Vision replaced detail. While this approach some satisfied, it frustrated others. The longer questions lingered, the more they multiplied, creating a sense that clarity was always just out of reach. Another layer of drama emerged as people speculated about long-term consequences. What would happen if donor confidence continued to waver? How would leadership adapt if support thinned? Could the organization maintain momentum without addressing the concerns head-on? These questions were hypothetical, but they carried weight. They framed the situation as an ongoing test rather than a temporary crisis, keeping audiences engaged and invested in every development. Public reaction during this phase felt different from before. Outrage softened into scrutiny. Enthusiasm cooled into observation. Applause became conditional. Audiences watched not to celebrate, but to evaluate. Fans are shocked by how quickly admiration turned into analysis. Every word spoken on stage felt less like inspiration, but more like evidence to be weighed. That shift changed the dynamic entirely, turning public appearances into moments of judgment rather than unity. Erika continued to emphasize resilience, faith, and forward movement. For many, those messages still resonated deeply. They saw a leader refusing to be broken by noise and speculation. For others, the repetition felt hollow without accompanying transparency. The emotional gap between those groups widened, making consensus seem impossible. The story no longer moved toward resolution. It circled, feeding on itself, sustained by unresolved tension. As the reports framed it, the greatest damage may not have come from any specific claim, but from erosion. Trust rarely collapses all at once. It wears down slowly, chipped away by unanswered questions and shifting energy. That process appeared to be unfolding in real time, visible not through official statements, but through tone, behavior, and reaction. Perception hardened into belief for some, while others clung to hope that clarity would eventually emerge. By the end of this phase, the main body of the story reached a strange standstill. Nothing definitive had been proven, nothing conclusively denied, yet the atmosphere described felt irrevocably altered. What once felt like a unified movement now appeared fragmented by doubt and defense. Erika remained at the center of that tension, not as a confirmed villain or unquestioned hero, but as the symbol of a moment where loyalty, power, and trust collided. The reports leave the story suspended in uncertainty, a movement waiting for reassurance, supporters waiting for clarity, critics waiting for confirmation, and Erika standing in the middle, navigating a storm shaped as much by perception as by reality. Whether the tension will ease or escalate remains unclear. What is clear is that the conversation has changed permanently, and once that happens, returning to what was before becomes nearly impossible. Now, it all comes down to what you think. After hearing how these reports have spread, how emotions have shifted, and how trust has been tested, the question is no longer just about money, it is about belief. Do you see this as a moment of unfair speculation fueled by grief and online noise? Or do you think the concerns being raised deserve real answers and transparency? Because depending on where you stand, this story feels either like a
storm that will pass or the beginning of something much bigger. You have watched how perception alone can reshape a narrative, how silence can feel louder than words, how loyalty can turn into doubt without a single confirmed fact. And that is why stories like this matter, not because they are proven, but because they show how quickly public opinion can shift when clarity is missing. One side sees resilience, the other sees control. One side sees a leader under pressure, the other sees a system that no longer feels familiar. Both reactions exist at the same time, and neither can fully cancel out the other. This is where you come in. If you were a donor, would you wait patiently for reassurance, or would you start asking harder questions? If you were a supporter, would you defend the mission at all costs, or demand full transparency before giving your trust again? And if you were in the spotlight, would you stay visible and emotional, or step back and let the noise settle? These are not easy questions, and that is why this conversation refuses to die down. Drop your thoughts in the comments and let everyone know where you stand. Do you think the situation is being blown out of proportion, or do you believe the concerns being discussed cannot be ignored any longer? If you found this breakdown interesting, make sure you like the video so